Okay, thank you very much. So today we have an opportunity to honour two of the world's most outstanding contributors to public finance. So one is Richard Musgrave. I think his picture is just there. So he's a pioneer, to a large extent the founder of modern public finance. He's born in Germany and he studied here in Munich before moving to the US. So he made a huge contribution to the study of public finance, as we all know. Some of it summarised in his classic text on the theory of public finance. As Marty Feldstein said, Richard Musgrave transformed economics in the 1950s and 60s from a descriptive and institutional subject to one that used the tools of microeconomics and Keynesian macroeconomics to understand the effects of taxes. And Musgrave himself was deeply involved in policy work as well as academic research, and his motivation was not simply to produce interesting research, but to help governments contribute to a better society. And I think that makes him a perfect introduction to today's second outstanding figure in public finance, Joel Slemrod, and for two reasons. One is that Musgrave worked at the University of Michigan for most of the 1950s, and it was there that he wrote the theory of public finance. Joel has been at the University of Michigan since 1987, and so he continues the fine traditions introduced there by Musgrave, and with outstanding success. The second reason is that Joel also has a deep interest in the real world, and in particular public finance in the real world. So I'll say more about that in a moment, but let me first give a brief introduction to Joel's life and times. So he graduated as an undergraduate degree from Princeton and then received his PhD from Harvard in 1980, where he was supervised by Marty Feldstein. He worked first at the University of Minnesota before moving to Michigan, where he has a number of jobs. He's professor in the business school and the Department of Economics and director of the Office of Tax Policy Research, and is also currently chair of the economics department, which seems to take up quite a lot of his time, I believe. So he says. So beyond Michigan, Joel has undertaken a huge range of advisory work around the world, working with all the major agencies like the World Bank, the IMF, the OECD, and he's been an immense source of advice to others, and among other things, as a member of advisory boards of two centres at least, one of which is my own, the Oxford University Centre for Business Taxation, but also the Tax Policy Centre in Washington. He was editor of the National Tax Journal for 6 years in the 1990s and has been co-editor of the Journal of Public Economics as well. He's received many honours, held many influential positions. He's currently vice president of the IIPF. He was president of the National Tax Association in the US in 2006. And his enthusiasm for that work and that position was summarised in the title of his presidential address at the time, which was "Why I Love My Job and the NTA." So last year, the NTA actually also honoured Joel by awarding him his most prestigious award, the Daniel M. Holland Medal for Distinguished Lifetime Contributions to the Study and Practice of Public Finance. And the list of winners of that medal kind of reads like a who's who of kind of leading American public finance scholars and includes both Richard Musgrave and Marty Feldstein. But let me return to Joel's interests in research and real-world tax policy. So, as I see it, Joel's work has always been characterised by an interest in how taxes are actually collected. This real world is characterised by high administrative costs, high compliance costs, and tax avoidance and tax evasion. For example, it matters whether personal income taxes are remitted by the employer or the individual through a personal tax return. And it matters not just because the costs associated with the tax collection itself, because it affects and should affect the design of the tax system itself. For example, we can have higher marginal rates of tax on income if we can be confident that those taxes can be collected. So Joel has explored these themes in a vast array of work, over 120 papers in academic journals, including all the top journals, many more in book chapters, several edited books, now 3 authored books and many other contributions. So it's impossible to do justice to all that research in just a few minutes. So what I plan to do is just mention a couple of my favourite papers, with apologies both to Joel and to you for ignoring many other fascinating contributions. So to begin, kind of one area of Joel's work that I've found very useful recently is his work on the elasticity of taxable income and its use in welfare analysis, and there's a recent paper in the Journal of Economic Literature on that. But an earlier paper is on the optimal elasticity of taxable income. And the basic idea is that the elasticity itself doesn't just depend on fundamental preferences of agents, but also actually depends on the way that taxes are collected and designed. So the issue of how personal tax is collected is an example of this. Better design of tax collection affects the elasticity itself, and that in turn creates freer choice of tax rates. So Joel's also applied similar ideas to thinking about the nature of optimal taxation in developing countries. So with Damika Dharmapala and Jay Wilson, he's explored the cost of taxing firms of different size. So for small firms, the cost of collecting taxes may be excessive, and that suggests there should be an optimal threshold below which no tax should be levied. But having a threshold induces some firms to reduce their income, leaving a missing middle in the firms just above the threshold, and we see that empirically. But much of Joel's work has been empirical. He's very much in the forefront of what is referred to as the credibility revolution in applied econometrics. For example, his keynote lecture at the IIPF Congress in Uppsala in 2011 was focused on techniques that could be applied to assess the extent of tax evasion, finding evidence of the invisible, as he put it. When I saw him last summer, he was very excited about notches in the tax schedule, so where a marginal change in income causes a discrete change in the tax liability. So we'd expect that to have sizable effects on behaviour, and Joel has explored this in various ways, including a forthcoming paper in the Journal of Public Economics on how the design of cars responds to notches in fuel taxes. And another example of first-class empirical work is his design of an experiment in Minnesota in the 1990s, where letters got sent out to randomized groups of taxpayers, and at least one of these threatened an audit. And then the tax authority was able to identify how that affected tax collections and the following year. So we don't generally get to design real experiments in economics research, but perhaps this example should encourage us to think more about how we might do so. So I could say quite a lot more about his research, but I do want to leave time to say something more about his broader contribution and impact. And the starting point is the Office of Tax Policy Research at the University of Michigan, which Joel founded and has now directed for over 25 years. And the mission statement of the OTPR is worth reading. I think it is to encourage and facilitate joint research on the tax system by economists and scholars of other disciplines, and to serve as a liaison on tax issues among the academic, business, and policy-making tax communities. So and the OTPR has an extraordinary record of matching that mission. It's organised many conferences over the years, bringing together both academics and policymakers. The work has been very interdisciplinary, and Joel has worked with many people from other disciplines. Perhaps most important, I think, there is the number and quality of students and visitors that's passed through its doors. So with the help of Mary Cecchinesi, who is Joel's loyal assistant, I think we identified 34 successful PhD students that Joel has supervised in Michigan. And they've gone on to government and academic positions in the US and all around the world. So there are 4 at the Department of Treasury now, there's 2 at the Federal Reserve Board. Others are in academic positions all over the US, at Illinois, Minnesota, Columbia, Texas, Cornell, Chicago, UNC, Oregon, and elsewhere. And also around the world at Peking University, Colombia, the country, not the university, the Czech Republic, Chile, South Korea, Thailand, Taiwan, the list goes on. So I think it's hard to overstate that contribution. As my one-time supervisor, John Kay, once said, so academics may believe that influence comes from whispering in the ears of ministers, but the real route to influence is and always has been through one's students. And here's one example. Wojciech Kopczuk was a research assistant on the Minnesota experiment back in the 90s, around 2000. He then graduated to being a co-author on several papers with Joel, and still is. And he's now a professor at the Columbia University and co-editor of the Journal of Public Economics. That's just one out of many. So Joel has always been very supportive of students and others. And looking at his CV, I counted 64 different co-authors that he's worked with over that time. So it's quite a few. And beyond them, I think Joel has really reached out beyond academic economists to a much wider audience. So, for example, he's published 23 papers in the National Tax Journal, which really goes way beyond academic economics. And he writes for people outside economics and also the general public. And that's reflected in the title of his most recent book, which is Taxes in America, What Everyone Needs to Know. And it's also reflected in a series of videos on the OTPR website. So these come under the heading of Ask the Tax Professor, And there's a series of questions there which are basically current policy questions about tax. And it consists of Joel answering those questions. So I was so impressed by this idea, I thought I would show you one of these answers. So if I can make this work properly, I'm going to show you one of Joel's responses right now. And this is the question of, will lowering taxes generate more revenue?
Yes, it is generally true that when you tax something, you get less of it. The question, though, is what are the policy implications of that? And we have to be careful, because take this argument to its logical extreme, we'd want to keep lowering taxes on everything to get more of it until we have zero tax. And that certainly would lead to huge deficits and make us worse off. And of course, it would raise no revenue at all. So we have to think about what kind of taxes we want and what kind of taxes hurt the economy more than other kinds of taxes. And by the way, although it is true that lower tax generally gives you more of something and higher tax gets you less of something, it isn't true in general that lowering taxes gives you more revenue. The evidence suggests that the increase in economic activity and therefore the tax base just isn't big enough to offset tax cuts. So we just have to face up to the fact that lower tax rates will give us lower revenue, and then we have to think about how high we want tax rates to be.
Okay, there's a simple introduction to the elasticity of taxable income. Doesn't get right into all the details, but I think it's a pretty useful start. If you look on the website, you'll find a number of other interesting videos like that. So if you're confused about things, then I suggest you go there. So I've already had too much time probably, and I've barely begun to describe Joel's contributions. But let me finish with just a tribute to Joel himself. He's a wonderful person. He's immense fun to be with and to talk to about economics and anything else, really. So I did once spend a summer in Michigan with a young family at the time, visiting the O2PR. Joel was the perfect host, so he not only helped me with my research, but he introduced the whole family to some of the delights of American culture, like baseball at the Detroit Tigers, batting cages, and frisbee golf. So we had a great time then, and I still have a great time whenever I meet him. So thank you very much. Thanks.
So the Richard Musgrave Visiting Professorship 2013 is awarded jointly by the CESifo Group and the International Institute of Public Finance to Professor Joel Slemrod, who will deliver the Richard Musgrave Lecture on insights from a tax systems perspective.
Thank you very much.